JJ McCarthy's knee is 100% according to him. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, we're talking JJ McCarthy. That's a likely story. It's going to happen a lot. Look, what we have to break down of JJ McCarthy is pretty sparse, but every once in a while, there is some kind of narrative that takes over the whole day. So that's what we're going to do today. So JJ McCarthy was at the NFLPA golf event thing, did a scramble, made a good putt. That's out there. And did an interview with Kay Adams on the Up and Adams show. And it's a 6-minute spot. It's not a hard watch. I'll link it in the show notes. Yell at me if I forget. It's another one of those times where a quote goes giga turbo viral and isn't necessarily a proper read on the conversation. We'll get to that. But to me, the headline of this was the first question in that interview, where Kay Adams asks, how's the knee? And he says, in my opinion, it's 100%. That is, I think, a different thing from being fully medically cleared. So technically maybe not, but it is March 25th as of that interview being recorded and airing. And his knee is, if not 100%, maybe technically not 100%. It's there. And that timeline, while it is the timeline we were mostly told, there is something a little comforting to it being officialized, right? Okay, we're there. It's 100%. It's over. We did it. He's ready to go. If, in the event that he does end up still missing stuff because he's in some kind of rehab, that would be kind of crazy. It would probably mean there was some setback that people didn't tell us about, and it would make that interview look either very unfortunately ironic, if not, maybe something was up, but we don't live in that world until we live in it. So with the way that the Vikings have approached this offseason, and whether or not they trust JJ McCarthy has been the central question. I just did this show last week. Do they trust JJ McCarthy? It was a Town Hall Tuesday, but it was one of the questions on that Town Hall Tuesday. Do they trust JJ McCarthy? And my read on their actions is that they very much trust JJ McCarthy. They trust him a lot. But not everybody sees it that way. And as evidenced by the reaction to a quote from later in that interview, which we'll talk about, the Vikings' attitude toward JJ McCarthy is something that has been called into question. So I wanted to really hash it out from all possible angles. How do the Vikings feel about JJ McCarthy? I think first things first, the knee had to be out of the way. Of course, there was that looming specter. What if it's way worse than we think? And you could really easily start to get conspiratorial, where you look at, the meniscus, the fact that Adam Schefter called it an ACL for 3 months. He's back to calling it a meniscus, by the way. He did just misspeak. People took that as reporting, as JJ or as Adam Schefter saying it actually was an ACL, and we've all been lied to about the thing, as if they wouldn't have put together a huge, series of bylines on that. But sure, okay, yeah, they thought that, it was actually an ACL tear, and that's a much worse injury with a longer rehab process. And then there was another procedure in November, which some people said, oh my God, he's got 2 knee surgeries. Some people, it's so easy to fall into, oh my God, he tore his ACL twice. The true setback, what Deshaun Watson is going through, a setback in recovery. And it really wasn't that. It was a meniscus injury. If you want, you can read my kind of vulgar article over at Wide Left about knees and menisci and it was a little speculative. We didn't have all the information when I wrote it, but it was just kind of like a breakdown of all the different things it could have been and how meniscus injuries work, where like how the NFL tends to address meniscus injuries, which is that they'll either trim it or repair it. The trim is a shorter recovery, but jeopardizes the long term. The repair does not jeopardize the long term, but it pretty much means out for the season. They went with the latter. But that's the nice thing about it, is that it does not jeopardizing the long term. You're fixing the problem rather than cutting away entire material that won't grow back. So it just heals really, really, really slowly because there's not a lot of blood flow to a meniscus. That's why it's an out for the season injury. But meniscus injuries in particular don't have a very long history of being full calendar year recovery processes. So to me, it was never really more than a never say never kind of worry that J.J. McCarthy wouldn't be ready to start in 2025. If a small meniscus repair turned into a multi-year problem, that meant something else went wrong. That has to mean that there was an additional problem added into that. You can't rule that out. Setbacks happen. What if, another injury happens during his rehab process? What if there's some real bad luck thing? What if he steps on a staircase wrong? And so having having him say knees 100% to me it's not the biggest news in the world, but it is nice to kind of check that box, to cross that item off the list. Okay, we don't have to be worried about it for that reason. So now the decision about who is the starting quarterback for 2025, however obvious you think it may be, can be a little bit more straightforward, can be entirely on the merits of J.J. McCarthy. What do you think of J.J. McCarthy? So then the question becomes, what do the Vikings think of J.J. McCarthy? We can ask them that, and people do. Hey, what do you think of J.J.? How's his rehab going? Is he going to be the starter? Blah, blah, blah. Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell were asked at the Combine. They were asked all throughout the offseason last year, what's the deal? And it's all been glowingly positive. Now, I can already hear you screaming at me. Well, that doesn't matter, right? Everybody's going to say the right things on the podium. They'll all say, Josh Rosen is our guy, right? And fair. Lots of reasons to lie on that. But for whatever it's worth, the quotes are different, I think, than what you'll hear from Shane Steichen about Anthony Richardson. And maybe Anthony Richardson is an unfair example because the Colts have openly admitted they're having a competition for him. But even that, he'll say, well, I think competition is great for anybody. Anytime you got competition at any position, whether it's the quarterback position or whatever it may be, I think it makes everyone better. That's a direct quote from Shane Steichen in a press conference about the matter in February. That's different, right? The Vikings haven't really said that they even intend to have J.J. McCarthy in a competition. That's just an assumption that we all made, that I made. That I thought, like, of course, right? Like, he hasn't played it down. Why would you just anoint him the job? But it seems closer and closer that they are anointing him the job. So, look, you don't need to necessarily believe that the Vikings are being truthful here. But I'm going to read you the quotes anyways. Kwesi was asked about this at the Combine. And he said, asked about his rehab, said he's on the field, throwing in training. He looks great. He's excited. You talk about a kid who's just obsessed with football and loves being around the game. So we're excited about what we have in him. We're excited for this offseason for him. It's a big offseason, and then we'll continue from there. Okay. So you could, if you wanted to, really like nitpick the wording, it's a big offseason for him. Does that mean everything's on the line? Does that mean that if he doesn't shape up this offseason, they're going to kick him out the door? No, they just said we're excited about him. If you're going to take the words at face value, you should probably take all the words at face value, or you should decide this is probably just coach speak, in which case you ignore it. I feel like those are the two options, but saying that there's some like secret hidden meaning in this, that they're really not going to get rid of J.J. McCarthy is a little bit Illuminati for me. Kevin O'Connell's quote, at least one from earlier in the offseason before Sam Darnold signed with Seattle, was, well, we would love to have Sam back in Minnesota, but at the same time, we do feel very confident in J.J. McCarthy. We drafted him 10th overall for a reason in what was, in my opinion, a historically good quarterback draft last year. McCarthy is the future of the franchise. They have told you that. And again, for whatever this is worth to you, O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah have, in their short tenures here so far, a pretty consistent history of being truthful at the podium. They haven't done like a ton of lying. If you look back at Kwesi's quotes from the combine about Kirk Cousins, right? It was all a little non-committal, but they haven't really had their we're not trading Percy Harvin moment. And so I don't think that we need to hold them to that same level of like everything they say is secretly a lie. But let's be honest here. Actions speak louder than words. And while there's some more words to go over, we're also going to go over their actions. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by Gametime. It's the best place to find last-minute tickets, and it shouldn't be stressful if you got to do that. If you're trying to get tickets to an event, perhaps a basketball game in your area, maybe, just think about it. Gametime makes it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Their curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so on. They have super deals, the lowest price. The super deals are amazing. It's like this like big red icon. You can't miss it. That's going to be the best price you can find. And if they're wrong, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And they have the best customer service policy in the ticketing industry. I can vouch for that personally. So go check them out. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Moving right along with the Locked On Vikings podcast. If you have had enough waxing and waning about whining about quotes from a golf event, you want some film, some X's and O's, check out patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. That's my Patreon page where I do some film breakdowns. I've got a Javon Hargrave one coming up, as well as one on the two Colts linemen, Will Fries and Ryan Kelly, and a Jordan Mason episode. So you can go check those out, as well as all kinds of stuff that's free to watch from earlier in the season. If you want to watch any breakdowns of any particular games, I did several every week all year long. Okay. So the thing everybody's talking about is the elephant in the room that I should probably tell you now. Kay Adams, conducting this interview, was operating under the assumption that J.J. McCarthy had been informed that he is QB1. After all, the Vikings' actions, letting Sam Darnold walk, Daniel Jones, all that, insinuate that J.J. McCarthy is QB1. Now, the Vikings are not done at QB. And it's very important to understand, especially if you're maybe not a Vikings fan, but you're listening to this because you're confused about the situation. The thing to understand is that right now they have two guys under contract. At the end of last season, the Vikings had 5 quarterbacks under contract. Not to say that they're going to get 5, right? That includes one that was on IR, but I would not be surprised. I would be surprised if it were less than 2 quarterbacks that joined between now and the beginning of camp, and I would not be surprised at all to see 3 new faces hit the Vikings quarterback room at some point over the next calendar year, or at least until the end of next season. There's going to be quarterbacks, and what annoys me is I feel like no matter who that is, there will be people who disbelieve in J.J. McCarthy so much that they think that the worse that player is perceived to be, the more desperate they will think the Vikings are to get out of their J.J. McCarthy mistake. And I think it's a really naive and childish way to look at it. If they signed Drew Lock, you're going to have some chud being like, oh my God, they're so pissed off about J.J. McCarthy. They think Drew Lock is going to fix their problems. When in reality, somebody like Drew Lock is just clearly going to be a backup. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Vikings turn to the draft for a backup quarterback if they do have Ryan Tannehill on speed dial, and he ain't going to take any other job. if, in the event JJ McCarthy gets injured, then, you call him up so you don't have like a rookie backup that you're like relying on, but to actually have QB2 in season be a rookie, and then you can use your reps that way. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see them go that route. It's a little bit galaxy brain for me. It's a little fragile, because what if somebody else's QB gets hurt and Ryan Tannehill does that, and now you're kind of relying on it. But that is exactly the kind of risk I could see Kwesi like going for. So I wouldn't rule out the draft. I wouldn't rule out the Vikings carrying this need into the draft, through the draft, and then signing somebody after the draft. Especially because if somebody like, say, Carson Wentz doesn't get signed before the draft and gets signed after the draft, it no longer counts toward the compensatory formula, preserves a 4th-round pick next year. That seems like it's worth just doing this later in the calendar year. It just is a matter of risk again. So it's all risk management, right? But Kay Adams was operating under the assumption that JJ McCarthy is QB1. So am I. And I don't think that she's wrong to do that, and I am still doing that even after the way that JJ McCarthy answered that. She asked, so when did they tell you? What was it like? She's just trying to do like a fluff piece kind of thing. Tell me about your mentality when you learned you would be QB1. And he's like, they haven't said that to me yet. They haven't told me at all. And then he kind of said some grind set nonsense about like, well, I'm happy they do it because like then it makes me like, I love having to earn my keep. I love having to prove myself all the time because I'm a grind set guy. That's his brain. Okay. Well, get ready for years and years of quotes like that. But people ran with this like crazy. People went nuts with the idea, oh my God, the Vikings still haven't declared JJ McCarthy as QB1. Holy crap. This would be an extraordinarily weird time to do that. That's like my first thought is like, wait, you guys wanted that in March? That is not when you do that. To give you an example, Caleb Williams, who didn't have any serious competition in Chicago last year, it was Tyson Bagent was the backup. They didn't name him QB1 officially until May 10th. Obviously they had just drafted him, but basically on the eve of OTAs, right? So that would be the first logical moment to do it for the Vikings, and I would assume that by OTAs they've got whatever backup they want. They would have in house. And then they would make that declaration. And even if they didn't make a press release about it, the fact that JJ McCarthy will be taking QB1 reps will kind of tell you everything you need to know there. So that was my first reaction. But also, I think, again, there seems to be this yearning sense to dismiss the Vikings wanting to go in with JJ McCarthy. And there's this weird, vicious cycle of media where a bad, stupid rumor will come up that's not verifiable. People who don't care about verifying it will spread it. People who don't care about, vetting the information they get will get it from those sources that didn't vet, and then take it as gospel. And then they will like take it the next step and infer what that means about how the Vikings feel about their quarterback. And it's like none of this was real. But now there's this very pervasive narrative that, look, the Viking, this offseason has kind of been a carousel of narratives, of media cycles. We had the Sam Darnold, is he going to be the starter cycle? And then we had the Sam Darnold, is he going to be tagged and traded cycle? And then we had the Daniel Jones cycle. And then we had the Aaron Rodgers cycle. And now we're in the Ryan Tannehill cycle. And none of it's been about JJ McCarthy. But at every single turn, it's been really easy to look at it and be like, man, if they're considering this, what does that mean about JJ McCarthy? To me, it means nothing. They have 2 guys under contract. They have to add 2, maybe even 3 guys to that room. So the fact that they are determining who those guys are is like a process we should very much expect them to be going through. But it doesn't stop people from kind of jumping to a conclusion, going from asking about it to jumping to the answer with really no additional evidence. Very frustrating stuff to cover. But for me, nothing about what we have seen so far is weird at all. And in fact, I think it would be much weirder if things had gone down a different... it would be very weird for the Vikings to be like, JJ McCarthy is QB1 in the Super Bowl. Nobody's listening to you. People are focused on the Chiefs and Eagles. Shut up. Why are you saying that? So I don't know. That's where I'm at with this. But again, all of this has just been about words. The Vikings have had every chance to bail on this, and they didn't. And I think the subsequent decisions, when you think about their contexts and their costs and all that stuff, very, very telling stuff. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Walk with me on a hypothetical, if you would. Let's say the Vikings really did hate J.J. McCarthy. It wouldn't be unheard of. There are some pretty famous stories under either anonymity or, lacking the right specifics. But there have been, people in the NFL who, after their retirement, have been like, oh, yeah, we had times when we drafted a dude and we knew immediately he was a bust and it was a disaster. We were like, holy crap, this dude doesn't have it. This is over. Just immediately clear. And I think about that a lot. If that's true, if that is how obvious it is when you've got like a clear colossal bust, well, there's a few of those every draft. So that means every single camp, someone is coming into practice and going, beans, our dude sucks. And so if J.J. McCarthy is truly a big enough bust that the Vikings are going like, oh my God, we need Ryan Tannehill to start this year. Like if I'm going to try to take those people on faith, which those people, and I'm not talking about like Twitter accounts, there are people writing articles for large publications that are like, they're looking at Ryan Tannehill, wow, they must hate J.J. McCarthy. Okay, let's take that and really, let's really dive into what that scenario looks like, right? And that scenario probably has to be, no, not probably, it by necessity has to mean that in the training camp that they saw in the one preseason game, they saw enough horribad stuff that they don't like the kid anymore. And then you tore your meniscus and whatever, good luck on your rehab. We're probably doing this. And that scenario is just incompatible with the actions. It's certainly incompatible with the words, the way that O'Connell and Kwesi have talked about J.J. McCarthy, the way they talked about him last year when he was healthy, to the way they talked about him in the last month. But let's pretend all of that was lies because we got to save face. I'm trying to take this on like full good faith, right? Giving every single like concession, every benefit of the doubt. So then you get to the season. Sam Darnold has this great year. He's doing great. There's suddenly local reporting, which I trust, that the Vikings are reconsidering their sort of temporary hold on Sam Darnold. They're thinking about maybe more with him. Fair enough. When you're sitting at, 12-3, you're going, maybe we should run this back, right? That doesn't tell me whether or not the J.J. McCarthy thing is true. But hey, if you hated J.J. McCarthy, boy, you sure would flirt with that. And then he walks. And he signs a deal with the Seattle Seahawks, $33 million a year, 3 years, $100 million. And a total out after the first year, and nothing Darnold can do about it. Just very much prove-it contract. And so you would have to assume that whatever the Vikings offer was worse than that. Otherwise, he would have told the Seahawks no and come back to the Vikings to take their better offer, right? I don't feel like I've said anything too out of pocket yet. If the Vikings offered a deal that is worse than Seattle's, again, kind of incompatible with this hypothetical world we're living in where they hate J.J. McCarthy. If you hated your rookie quarterback and you had a good one in-house, you probably wouldn't give him a prove-it deal, right? Like if you're giving up on this guy because you're trying to get a new quarterback for this year, and to kind of lump it in with like the cap stuff that argument sort of comes along with, where, well, they're spending all their 2026 money because they're going to tank that year and they're really going all in for this 1 year and they're just trying to find a quarterback for it. And that was supposed to be Aaron Rodgers. If you're going to do that, then, one prove it year with Sam Darnold, and then what, you're going to go back to J.J. McCarthy in 2026? And that's going to be the move? Or you just want to let him captain the tank, I guess? Okay. Benefit of the doubt. We'll say that's the plan. They're going to do one. They maybe thought about doing 1 year with Sam Darnold and then tanking in 2026 with J.J. McCarthy, bad as he is, captaining the tank. Sure. So you do that, but you're not willing to spend $33 million on it for whatever reason. Suddenly you're going to start pinching pennies here, and you're going to let him walk. I don't know if I can explain that one in this context, but I'll let it go. Then you're looking at Daniel Jones. Well, Daniel Jones is going to cost you $15 million, and you just got to tell him. All you got to do to get him to take the job in Minnesota is tell him that he has a real shot at it. All you got to do is say, hey, you're maybe going to compete with J.J. McCarthy, but we've kind of seen that he sucks, and I bet you can take him. All you got to do is tell him that. But he doesn't take it. There's another off-ramp that you had. Then all these Aaron Rodgers rumors start swirling around. You said no to Sam Darnold, or maybe he said no to you. You said no to Daniel Jones, to a much smaller commitment in Daniel Jones. And now Aaron Rodgers is coming around. Now maybe you look at Aaron Rodgers, multiple, 4-time MVP, 15-year relationship with Kevin O'Connell, Hall of Famer to be, and you go, all right, maybe that's a little more exciting than Daniel Jones. Maybe you even knew about it, and you went, yeah, Daniel, good luck in Indy. Sam, good luck in Seattle. We're looking at Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he's going to have our all-in year here is going to be Aaron Rodgers. And then you just kind of say no. Vikings just said no to that. So again, if we look at this world where they hate J.J. McCarthy and using as evidence for that the fact that they molded over with Aaron Rodgers, wouldn't they have said yes to that? Thinking about a decision is not the same as making that decision. And thinking about something then ultimately declining it just feels like a responsible way to go about declining something. I don't know, man. Like somebody offers you a car for $50,000 and maybe it's a really good deal to get that car maybe it's a really nice car for $50,000 and you're definitely going to take that deal, but you got to sleep on it. That doesn't mean you don't like the deal. It just means you wanted to sleep on it. That's this crazy thing to me. I don't know how some of you people get through the day, to be honest, with the idea that like thinking about a decision is the same as making a decision. I genuinely don't know how you can like maintain a conversation. How do you do it? I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of somebody that has believed every one of these narratives, and I can't make it add up in my head. They've had so many off-ramps. And outside of all of that, and let's say you went, you know what? We watched some tape of Aaron Rodgers. We didn't like him in the Jets. It was a fun idea. Lots of accolades. Not the same guy anymore. We're going to move on. Okay. So we moved on from Sam. We moved on from Daniel Jones. We moved on from Aaron Rodgers. We still hate J.J. McCarthy. We just didn't like any of those solutions enough. Maybe that's the way it has to add up in my head. And then teams call you and say, hey, we heard you're looking at a couple of quarterbacks. Is J.J. McCarthy for sale? And the Vikings hang up on all of them. If you thought J.J. McCarthy was ass, would you not take those deals? Would you not, at some point, do one of these things? Or would you just say no to all of it and trot in with this quarterback you know is bad? I just can't fathom it. I really can't. And I look at this scenario, to really believe this, you have to believe two fundamentally incompatible things. One is that the Vikings think J.J. McCarthy is bad. And two, you have to admit that they're really committed to J.J. McCarthy. And you can't even explain that away by being like, yeah, but they're stupid. Well, Kwesi's an idiot. Like, you can't even do that, because if Kwesi's an idiot, then you're just saying that they're wrong about J.J. McCarthy. But like, they're following their own idiot opinions if you're calling them an idiot and just not following through on them. It doesn't make any sense. The knee is healthy. He's QB1. They've built around him. It's J.J. McCarthy's team. If you haven't accepted that yet, you need to wake the up. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.